Hello and welcome. I'm Jeffrey Mishlove. I imagine that by now many of you already realize that in conjunction with White Crow Books, we've just launched the new Thinking Aloud Dialogues book imprint, and our first title is There Life After Death?
Thinking Aloud. Conversations on the leading edge of knowledge and discovery with psychologist Jeffrey Mishlove.
Hello and welcome. I'm Jeffrey Mishlove. Our topic today is space exploration. With me is Robert Bigelow, the founder of the Bigelow Aerospace Corporation. Robert has also founded the Bigelow Institute for Consciousness Studies. Welcome, Robert.
Thank you, Jeff. It's a pleasure being here again.
It's a pleasure to be with you. We, in our previous interview, talked a lot about your childhood experiences and as well as the founding of the National Institute for Discovery Science and how that eventually, I guess, in your life evolved into the Bigelow Aerospace Corporation. And now we're going to probe more deeply into what it means for humanity to begin exploring outer space.
I guess there's two kinds of humanity, those that never do and those that do, right? And we are falling into the first category of those that never do, because it's been over a half a century since we have put people on the moon, and not just in orbit. And so I, like a lot of people, feel that we have missed opportunities. To me, it wasn't just a competition, which is how it started out, between Russia and the United States. And JFK took the gutsy approach, and he was the right president at the right point in time to take up that challenge and say, we're going to do it, and we're going to beat you. We're going to do it. So we have missed that kind of leadership virtually ever since, in terms of keep on exploring. We should have had other, which there are, other good reasons to go back to the moon, not just to win a contest, not just to win a game, very expensive game, but that's not where it should have ended.
Your focus has largely been habitats.
Yes.
In outer space,
yes.
Which is an area that's been largely neglected. It's mostly about getting there and coming back, and very little emphasis has been placed on livable habitats where people can get a lot done.
What's the story on commercial habitats? Okay, NASA wants very badly to get out of the space station and get into something bigger and better and all of that. But more importantly, to have the costs of that shouldered by the commercial sector. NASA is pretty famous for making a lot of bad deals, and the space station has been extremely costly. The cost of the shuttle was a catastrophe, $1.5 billion every time it launched, instead of $400 million, which is what they kept broadcasting all the time for years and years. $400 million. It was $1.5 billion every time it went up. So the commercial sector can spend money much more wisely and frugally than NASA ever thought of doing. And that's applicable to throughout all government agencies. We know that. No argument there. So the contest, though, to find commercial values to expand orbiting stations around Earth, that is the same kind of problem that there is in harvesting whatever from the moon. The moon is extremely valuable from a standpoint of what your life has been in, psychology. So let's forget helium-3 and anything else for a moment and just talk about the psychology of things. We only have one moon. And we see it in the daytime, we see it at nighttime. Opportunities like this of actually taking control and charge of the moon only happen maybe once a millennia. They're very, very rare. And people worry about the 1967 Space Treaty as to that being a prohibition against harvesting the moon. Well, they ought to be more worried about whether or not we can compete against China, and especially if they combine themselves with Russia. But China is perfectly capable, if they set their mind to it, of going after the moon and beating the United States if they want to. Mm-hmm. Everybody knows the financial difficulty that the United States now finds itself in. It's in a huge financial mess. We owe almost $32 trillion compared to $17 trillion 3 years ago.
We were once the largest creditor nation. Now we're the largest debtor.
We have less capability than we had before of being able to do large, great things. And part of any large vision of Go West, young man, has to do with financial capabilities. And the United States has spent itself into significant weakness in being able to do that. And obviously that's applicable to conducting effective, efficient wars in another kind of category. So having a strong financial foundation is very, very important as a nation. And psychologically, that may be the most valuable thing that there is about the moon, is that whoever controls it. Now, I'm going to the extreme and talking about not partnering, not cohabitating or anything like that, but I'm talking about what if a country like China managed to engineer deliberately a program of control. I can even describe how it will happen, but let's talk about, first of all, what are the effects of that? And what are the effects of every man, woman, and child on the planet going outside and looking at that body, the moon, and realizing it's China that owns it, that controls it. And one way or another, they control it. The United States would have to probably have an enormous suffrage of that image. We would rank number 2, no question about that, regardless of other kinds of ways of calculating how we might rank number 2, number 3 in the world, unless we were to try and do the same thing with Mars. But if you were a betting man, and you did live in Las Vegas for a while.
17 years.
Would you bet against China being able to get to Mars before we did in a very elaborate kind of way? I would say that's not a bet I would want to cover. Mm-hmm. Okay? So the psychological impact on the human race would be absolutely huge. Yeah. It'd be where China's indisputably number 1 now, and the United States is indisputably number 2 or less.
In what sense? And you mean in terms of advances in space exploration?
Before you even get there, in the sense of psychological impact on the human race.
Okay. They certainly have the largest population. They have the second largest economy. So
you would say, well, what is it more tangible? It's one of something. Okay, so China and India are neck and neck. Population-wise, right?
Yeah, I think India's number 1 now.
Yeah, I think by about 20 million people. Mm-hmm. It's really tight. But China's indisputably financially in a terrific position. American political management has been foolish for a long time, but they pander to the voter. They always have pandered to the voter. So if you can buy the votes, why not buy it with other people's money? Just go ahead and buy it. But the Chinese have a bifurcated economy.
Yes.
They have control through communism. Mm-hmm. They have economics through capitalism.
Yes.
That's a really powerful combination. Very, very powerful. Mm-hmm. You can dictate anything you want to your media. Their space program is the Red Army space program. Mm-hmm. Okay? It's not like a civil program like ours. Mm-hmm. Ditto for Russia. So those programs do what the governments want them to do. They're not in a commercial or a private citizen kind of situation. They're military.
NASA is a civilian organization.
Correct. So from a psychological standpoint, that is huge. That's something you can't buy. It's not It's not a material. It's something immaterial. It's something that goes to the belief system of a people. Mm-hmm. For better or worse, right or wrong, it's the belief system of people that leaders usually try to control one way or another. Whether it's a political philosophy or religious philosophy, it doesn't matter. The point is exactly the same. Mm-hmm. You're trying to control the minds of people that dictates their behavior.
That's clear. I mean, every country feels they want to have a unified population, not a population that's going to rebel against the establishment.
That's right. People look at the 67 Space Treaty and say, oh, that can't happen. Well, that's because they haven't read it.
Well, what's the premise? I'm assuming the premise is that the moon, like Antarctica, it belongs to international organizations.
Yes and no. So there are about 170 signatories to the 67 Treaty. Thank goodness we didn't sign the 72 Lunar Treaty. We didn't sign that. But we did sign the 67. The treaty provides the responsibility for every signatory, for every sovereign country that signed that treaty. Each sovereign country has the obligation and the responsibility to go ahead and produce and promote and profit from the lunar activities for the common good. Mm-hmm. It doesn't mean you're prevented from going in there and extracting something and then selling it for the common good. Mm-hmm. Isn't the pharmaceutical industry for the common good?
In theory.
Yeah, in theory. Yeah. All right. So the premise is exactly the same. It's up to each sovereign country to engineer the ways for them to have bases and to make reasons to justify that economically.
And the moon's a big place. It's a quarter the size of the Earth. There should be plenty of room for multiple ventures.
There is and there isn't. There is beachfront property. Mm-hmm. Okay. So there are certain areas that are not beachfront property. So the onus is on every signatory to engineer those ways for the common good. And you can interpret that. As a signatory, you are a sovereign country, and you can interpret what you are doing. Capitalism is for the sovereign good. If it weren't for capitalism, America wouldn't be able to give away all the money it's been giving away, mm-hmm. right? To a point. And then it can't give it away anymore. It won't have it.
And we may be getting close to that point.
We'll be getting close. Yeah. All right. The onus is on every signatory. And let's talk about bases for a minute. It's clear in the treaty that you can have a base. It's not clear as to the size of that base. It could be huge. Mm-hmm. It'd probably be something that you need to establish borders, which is not a good word in some places today, but I think it's a really good common sense word. Mm-hmm. But you would have to establish borders on a base, define them. You are obligated to provide aid and assistance to somebody that's in trouble on your base. But you also can control your base. You don't have to let in anybody at all, unless you're doing something for a humanitarian reason. Mm-hmm. It also doesn't say how many bases you can have. So it doesn't describe their size. Are they Rhode Island or are they Texas or Alaska? Mm-hmm. And how many are you going to have? There is an interesting article, though. Article number 16 is 2 sentences long. So if I were China, I would say, I'm going to invoke Article 16 when I'm ready. Mm-hmm. Okay? And what I will do is establish a base or bases, and then I will enter into a program of a variety of kinds of scientific research, but I'm also going to do on-site surveying and mapping. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to put down cadastrals and monuments and establish my corners. permanently.
For the benefit of me and our viewers, what is a cadastral?
It's a metal tube that's pounded into the ground. It has a large flat surface on the top like a nail.
Yes.
It looks like a giant nail, a huge nail. And you pound them into the ground, and that's usually maybe the corners of townships.
I see.
You have section townships and ranges here on the earth, Monuments tend to be just more easily destructible, depending on obviously the construction of the monument. But a pile of rocks can be relocated pretty quickly. So the point is, you're establishing patent territory, and as a sovereign country, you are entitled to extract. But as a sovereign country, you can define the perimeters of your bases. And we said it's not limited to what size is your base. It's mute on that. And how many are you going to have? And Shackleton's crater is one of the beachfront property areas. The backside of the moon is a big problem because of all the craters that the backside of the moon has. The front side has had Earth to help protect it. The backside has not. So Article 16 is interesting because if I got all my resources together on the moon, I was able to traffic quickly from the Earth to lunar depots that are going to be able to traffic shuttles to the surface, to the lunar depot, then back to Earth again. So you get that transportation cycle going. And then
the lunar depot, what is that?
Well, it's an orbiting station. And it could be for a lot of reasons. It could be a warehouse. It could be a hospital.
Would orbit the moon? Or?
Yes, orbiting the moon. More than one.
Yes.
Like you would have around Earth, but more than one. It could be a way station for people in order to sleep over, rest, prepare to go down to the surface, or vice versa. And the moon only has, 1/6 gravity. So it might be a place where you have a rotating system where you can influence more gravity so that when they get to Earth, depending on how long they've been in that 1/6 environment, remember where the people would weakly crawl out of the shuttle after being in the shuttle, and they would be very weak and have to be assisted in some cases to get out of the shuttle. It could be worse than that. If you're on the moon for 6 months in 1/6 G, there probably would be centrifuges or something to give you some artificial boost every day that you'd have to do. So the point really is that Article 16 allows you to back out in 12 months. You send a letter of withdrawal to the United Nations Committee and say you no longer want to be a member because you have other things in mind that you're not going to talk about. And you're going to be actually confiscating everything. Okay, so now you have zero obligations. The handcuffs are gone from the 67 treaty, and because you've already established your perimeters, your bases, and everything. Now you do whatever you want to do and survey the hell out of everything, an old-fashioned way. And those kinds of patents are defendable in any court. Practically any court in the world would defend those.
A patent.
A land patent.
I see.
A land patent.
A land patent being a claim.
Well, like the Spanish land grants in the United States. They went back to 1800s or 17, earlier, and depending on how they were documented and so forth, they could be very effective. So Article 16 is the way out to then just proliferate everywhere and stick your flags every place if you want to do that. You can still get away with a tremendous confiscation of territory just by establishing bases and numerous bases. There's no limit to the size. There's no limit to the number.
But you would need to somehow stake it out.
Yes, you would want to have parameters to establish this is my turf, this is my territory, do not enter.
It's not enough to say sit in Washington, D.C. and say, here's the map and this is what we are claiming for ourselves.
You can't trust Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C. has been a joke for quite some time. They're dishonest. They're not trustworthy. You would never do a business deal, in some ways, with maybe a handshake because of the nature, the efficacy of the honesty and character of the individual, like yourself. You'd never do that with a typical politician, ever. Ever would never do that. They owe allegiance to the voter, not to you. not to the citizen. Only if you're going to vote for them, then you're the friend for a time being, right? So I have no respect.
Well, you've had a lot of dealings with politicians.
For most politicians, and a high, vast majority, I do not have respect for them because you have to earn it. It's not something to be given away. You can't. You have to earn it. You know, the moon is extremely important. Whoever does extract the helium-3 gas, which is maybe several meters deep, will have a very interesting fuel. We get it on Earth by the decomposition of nuclear warheads, the radiation on that off-gassing or whatever they call it on nuclear warheads, but it's very, very rare. But there are other heavy metal resources there that can be extracted. And it is also the jumping off place to the rest of the solar system. So the moon is terribly valuable.
It sounds like what you're saying is that the helium-3 alone, forget the other heavy metals, would be worth far more than the whole United States debt.
So can you imagine if 40 tons of this gas can supply all the energy needs for a year of the United States? That value is huge. But what if you have the only operating fission reactors? Part of the function of not having any, we currently don't, is that you don't have enough feedstock to play with. Because that's a problem, chicken or egg kind of thing. So, but if you had plenty to play with, then the odds are you're going to find some solutions. And you could have the monopoly on that. Again, China could be a powerhouse with that kind of energy. So people have been talking about helium-3, ad nauseum. But if it actually happens, then everybody's going to be, I told you so. That's how it works.
Seems like there's enough helium-3 to share amongst multiple nations if they wish to divide up the resources.
What's the potential of that not happening because someone has engineered a way to become very efficient in ownership, of the predominant amount. There have been some wild estimates that there's somewhere between 1 million and 20 million tons. 1 million to 20 million tons. So basically they don't know.
It's not distributed evenly throughout the moon.
It's probably in drifts. It's an isotope of helium that comes from sunlight that's drifted over billions of years, accumulated. So I imagine, like a lot of things, it's in different quantities and at different depths, So again, that'd be the surveying would probably be one thing you're doing is mapping out territory. The other is to find sites of where you have deposits that are concentrated deposits.
I had a person who was at one time a frequent guest on this program who advocated, not on this program, but advocated elsewhere, and it caused a rift between us. He said the United States should abrogate the space treaty and declare the moon as ours. He said this would immediately trigger a war with China, and we should take the opportunity now while we can to destroy China so that we can own outer space. I thought it was a crazy idea.
The problem is there are way too many things wrong with that. And one is that we're not prepared in the least. Okay. The second is that you want to try to engineer ways of making good, sensible partnerships. So what I would do is put our industry against their leaders, not our leaders. The deck is stacked against us, right? We don't have the competency in our leadership to do anything like that. In our corporate world, we do. We do have. So if our corporate world would go head-to-head in legitimate ways of negotiating with the Chinese, but that has to be backed up with behind the scenes, what are you capable of doing? Are you capable of actually getting there before them, and do they know that? Are they worried about that enough to where they're going to come to the table and actually do a fair partnership? So you have work to do at home to make some things, to engineer all of the get ready things,
I understand they are planning to land a person on the moon in a year or two.
Hooray.
Yeah.
A person or two. Yeah. Now, you didn't say 20 or 40.
No.
Okay. One or two. Yeah, hooray. Big deal. But there isn't a plan I've heard of that is of the type I'm suggesting to actually create bases on the moon, and I would energize our Space Force to have our military involved. NASA can't do it. The NASA that got us to the moon is not the same NASA today in any way, shape, or form. I'm just being frank. Okay? It's more of a jobs works program. I have friends there. There are some good people there, some really good people there, but they're marking their clock and looking for retirement, maybe joining an aerospace company. That's what a lot of NASA folks do, is serve out a certain amount of time, then go join an aerospace company and then retire after that. But there is corruption, okay, in NASA is no different than probably every agency, United States government agency. There are enormous inefficiencies in the way they spend money. And Eisenhower established NASA deliberately not to be a military organization. He was worried about the military-industrial complex, right? Yeah. So he scattered all these NASA centers, 10 NASA centers everywhere. Everybody's got to have a piece of that pie. So it's bleeding every place on goofball things that please somebody in this state, or in that state, and this state, and that state. So it has an impossibility of really doing an intelligent program with not enough money in order to go forward on something that's really important for the future, not just to get you reelected now and keep you elected. Okay? So leadership has been horrible in that agency. We've had very, very few good leaders in that. I think Golden was a good leader. I think he was good. I don't want to get into naming names, but we've had a few, very, very few though.
Well, I know you must be very disappointed in government right now, not just NASA, because as a result of circumstances involving the government, the Bigelow Aerospace Corporation has in effect been shut down.
That brings it home, but I care about my country. The real question hasn't anything to do with Bigelow Aerospace. Whether it stays closed or not, I'll adapt one way or another. And maybe it's a blessing in disguise for me, so I can be philosophical.
I'd like to think that it will be a blessing in disguise. But in any case, your vision was centered around the idea that the capitalist system would be appropriate for the exploration and the exploitation of the resources on the moon and elsewhere in outer space.
That isn't going to get voters. That never resonates with a government body that is hell-bent on getting as many voters any way they can. The space thing takes a back seat to all of that. It's usually been kind of it's not something that's politicized. It's something that has tried to be a little bit above politics, Space Force, the only way we could really compete against China is to empower Space Force and authorize it to have astronauts and really give it a decent, good budget that, and mostly important is it doesn't have a good mission. Go do it. Put your suits on, go to the moon, go to Lagrange Points, go do something. Go own a habitat someplace. Right? Get started, because the Chinese already are.
Well, we have the International Space Station. It's mostly American and Russian, I gather. And as I understand it from our conversation, the key to being able to conduct large-scale experiments, manufacturing or mining or any kind of industrial operation that requires many people will be expandable habitats.
That's the current opinion of ourselves and of NASA people. They use us as the gold standard in terms of trying to achieve the least leak rate. We are less than the aluminum structures in leak rate. Mm-hmm. Okay, all things leak a little bit. In the defense against space debris, we are better than the aluminum structures by a long shot.
That's interesting because most people imagine that an inflatable structure could be easily punctured.
So inflatable structures aren't balloons. We have deliberately destroyed a lot of full scale, and small scale structures. So they expunge gas. They don't go bang, but they also have shields. So you have a restraint layer that's like the steel belts of your tire, but they're not steel. Yeah. You have an air barrier that controls all the gas. And then you have a series of shields. And the larger the structure, the thicker the shields, the more shields that you have. And that means the larger the space debris is that you can defend against. And you have micrometeorites that hit lots of times.
The size of a grain of sand.
Yeah, very small particles. Space debris is a potentially very dangerous, chaotic kind of thing.
In near-Earth orbit, particularly.
Yeah. Especially when you have swarms of tens of thousands of satellites and so on. Yeah. So it's a thing to cope with, for sure. But so expandable systems have benefits that aluminum structures or metallic structures can't possibly have. And the biggest one of all is volume, because it goes up by the cube.
And, according to news reports, had it not been for COVID, and I don't know what other obstacles you've encountered, at this point in time, we're recording this in June of 2023, you would be the owner of a hotel in orbit.
Well, we would be. Our plant would be very active. Yeah. I would have probably pursued $1 million that NASA still owes us. After we did all the work, they still owe us $1 million. I would have pursued that. But more importantly, I would have pursued pounding on the door, insisting that we re-enter the competitions that we were blocked from when we were the ones that discovered what money NASA really had for expandable for any habitats, right? And they didn't know. Yeah. And I tell them, and then they verify it. And then they said, well, you already backed out, and you're not allowed back in. So I would have probably forced that to the courts. You would have taken that. I would have taken it to the courts, and I would have won.
But COVID interfered? Is that what you're saying?
It did. It did. The governor, who's no longer our governor in Nevada, shut us down as a non-essential business. So we did. And so there was no point in going through all those gymnastics, but I would have definitely tied NASA up in a very strong lawsuit, and we would have won, because the number they said in black and white, that's all the money there is, and we needed double that amount of money, and then the OMB said, oh, that's just a placeholder. That money was just a placeholder. We didn't know how much it was going to be, and then later they awarded to other companies that were going to piecemeal it. Well, we could have piecemealed it too. We could have said, okay, this will take care of 50%, and worry about the other monies later in further appropriations. But I'm frustrated by the mess the country is in, because I love my country, and it's hard to say to hell with it. Just because you're angry and upset, and there's so much that is wrong, and people so narrow and bad in their thinking. They're just after votes, you know. So it's a pathetic thing, and a lot of people that say, well, I love my you know, I've got my hand out as to what you can do for me. Mm-hmm. Okay, forget what John Kennedy said.
Yeah.
You know, don't ask what your country can do for you. Mm-hmm. Ask what you can do for your country. Mm-hmm. Well, that to people, that's baloney into a lot of people's minds. Yeah. It's not in my mind. Mm-hmm. It's not in my mind in the least. And I think he was a great leader. I think he was a terrific leader. And that philosophy says, yeah, give something back to your country, damn it. Stop always taking. And that's the philosophy that I see that permeates this country. You don't try to get contaminated by that stuff, you know?
It's hard for me to imagine what it must have been like for you investing, I don't know how many millions of dollars and 20 years of your life building an aerospace business only to run into these obstacles that you've just described.
Well, I'm not a super rich guy. Mm-hmm. I spent $375 million out of pocket after income taxes on my aerospace company. And we spent that money very efficiently because we accomplished a lot. Mm-hmm. You know, we still have 3 structures in space, in orbit, that nobody else does. And we launched 2 of them in 2006 and 2007. Mm-hmm. And one had 11 or 12 cameras, and the other one had like 22 cameras, total inside and out. Mm-hmm. On the second one, called Genesis 2, we did something really fun that nobody's ever done since. We took, on our solar, we had 2 solar array panels, and we had a projector on one and a camera on another. And we could upload a video, a picture, a photograph, onto the hull of our spacecraft. We could broadcast that and project it onto the hull of our spacecraft. So we projected every employee in the company's picture for God and everybody to see, the entire universe, for X amount of time on the hull of our spacecraft, downloaded it. In fact, we have some large banners in our building that have people's faces on those. That was a fun. We also had a Fly Your Stuff program. For $295, you could fly something the size of a golf ball, or a business card or a photograph, and we would take pictures of it, which we took pictures of every single one and download them so people had the proof there. So they're all floating around, right? And we had circulating fans inside. We had no actual air conditioning. We just circulated fans. And the rotation of the spacecraft kept an ambient temperature between, Fahrenheit, like 50 to maybe 75 degrees, and our shields to boot. And so we did that, and we had human ashes, which maybe we weren't supposed to do, I don't know. We had pet ashes, you know, and we had lots of business cards and like that. And that was a fun program, you know, to network with people on, and because those things meant something to them, and we flew them.
Well, you had a vision for what the movement of the humanity into outer space could be like, how it could work both financially and technologically.
We were having fun too. You know, we were inventing things all the time. Like I said before, I have like 29 patents, and we have a lot of trade secrets, which is in having to do with methodologies of processes and that kind of thing. But we were having fun, and things were happening, if not every day, every week. We were having something going on. It could be a test. It could be something larger than that. It could be a new program that maybe we're going after, you know. And that's part of the program. When a problem is when NASA basically is the fountainhead of all the programs, unless you have a lot of cash and you just create your own programs. You know, like Elon is doing, you know, with his super giant rocket, you know, and that's all his own money. It's not NASA money at all. And so he's very important in America's space future. He's super important.
at least from what I read in the news, the big emphasis, and I've certainly heard it from Elon, is going to Mars. And I gather that you think that that's premature.
For 20 years, rockets were not our business and never will be. Keeping you alive was our business. Mm-hmm. And having you in enclosures that made you safe was our business. Nobody had to tell us that's what we needed to do. Not NASA. Nobody needed to tell us that was our responsibility. Mm-hmm. We needed to do that. Mm-hmm. And we needed to be the best at doing that. And we developed the best enclosures, metallic, fabric, or whatever, it doesn't matter. The safest enclosures that exist today, right now. Getting to the moon is one thing. And we haven't done it for over half a century, right? Right. And I think you said earlier we're going to put 1 or 2 people there. I didn't hear 100 or 200. 1 or 2.
Yeah, I guess.
Okay. Yeah. So there's an order of magnitude, maybe it's worse than that, on the difficulties in going to Mars, maybe 2 orders of magnitude. It's really huge. Yeah. So there are the entire enclosure is super, super important. Mm-hmm. And the multiplicity of resources is super, super important. And so you don't send 4 people to Mars or 6 people to Mars. Having the multiplicity of humans is part of the menu. Mm-hmm. A multiplicity and back of spare parts, food, you name it. Mm-hmm. Having a good hospital is important. You know, you need a recovery, you need a surgical area, a recovery area, and a contamination ward, an isolation ward, mm-hmm. so you can so the whole ship doesn't catch whatever. We were building a standalone space station. Okay. Now ours was small, only 330 cubic meters, but it wasn't small if you stuck it on the ISS. Mm-hmm. The largest habitat on the ISS is roughly between 100 and 110 cubic meters. And the entire ISS, as I said, cubic meters for habitable volume is only about 950. Mm-hmm. So 3 of ours equal the entire habitable volume of the ISS. We were experimenting with full-scale mock-ups, and we were also looking at the engineering, or we wouldn't have done the mock-up, as to the plausibility of something that was 2,200 cubic meters in one volume. Mm-hmm. In one volume. It's in our shop today. Mm-hmm. And we did it years ago. We did the calculus on it, made sure that that we would have a satisfactory factor of strength and everything. And but it was 2,200 cubic meters compared to 950 of the ISS. But somewhere between 330 and 2,200, we can safely grow a much larger vessel. And volume really, really matters.
And then you can connect these modules as well.
That's the point. That's the point. You need all kinds of purposes for the modules. You can't have just a couple small few. Maybe you wind up with 1,000 cubic meters, but you wind up with 10 100 cubic meter modules? No, that's silly. That's handcuffing yourself. You need modules for the reasons I just stated. Yeah. You need them for entertainment. Mm-hmm. That's really important. Mm-hmm. Keep people from going crazy and to really enjoy the friggin' trip. Yeah. Right? So, but you need them for warehousing, everything. All kinds of spare parts, all kinds of supplies. You need a good command and control center. And all of these are potentially safe havens. So you need safe havens where you can take a solar flare event anyway. So you get a big dosage of lunar solar radiation.
Yeah, that's a big issue. I understand a high percentage of NASA's budget goes to solar weather, monitoring what...
It's a big issue, but it's not the biggest radiation issue by any means. Uh-huh. So yeah, you have these solar flares, and so you need to be in isolation until they pass. Mm-hmm. And so you need to have these facilities, but you may want to have some major ones. Mm-hmm. Depends on the amount of population that you have on board.
Yeah.
And then again, having multiplicity of human resources is really important.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't have a McMurdo problem where the only doctor is the ones that get sick that has to be operated on, right? So you don't want that.
Yeah.
So entertainment, all this is really important, and enough for psychology reasons. Psychological benefit is having distance between people in space.
Mm-hmm.
You want decent sleeping quarters, that have a lot of room and so on. So you want large structures, and you want a multiplicity of them, and then you worry about, okay, what's the propulsion going to be to navigate that to the destination?
Mm-hmm.
You have a 2-year cycle of the return, or when both bodies are in the right positions to go back to Earth in the shortest time, and vice versa.
2 years for Mars, is that what?
Yeah. But mainly it's you don't have any experience yet, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we're blessed with 5 Lagrange points.
That's what I want to get to.
5 Lagrange points. So in the Moon, Earth, solar whole system, we have one on the opposite side of the Moon, one between the Moon and Earth, one opposite the left and right side of Earth out, and one between the Sun and the Earth. And they're all roughly about 1 million miles or so from Earth.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where you can maintain the status quo without any energy for a long, long time.
Yeah. I mean, back in the 1970s and 80s, I was reading about, from a fellow, as I recall, named O'Neill. That would be the place to locate orbiting space stations at those points.
Yeah. So it takes little or no energy to stay there. And that's good if you're trying to practice, right? It's also good from a laboratory standpoint, because if you are having to destroy something, that's a place to destroy it, or in deep space further out, much further out.
Or to do the kind of research and manufacturing that requires zero gravity.
Yeah, and maybe nobody on board because of the nature of what's going on board that station. It could be a hostile environment inside that station that you would never want to have anybody near or inside. So before I would engineer a program to Mars, is not just what's all the enclosures look like, what does your propulsion look like, and all of that, and how can you get a quantity of people, not 4 or 6, to go to Mars. And oh, by the way, what are all the facilities waiting for you when you do get there, and backup facilities, because you just missed your touchdown location, by 80 kilometers or 180. So where's your backups? But where's all your practice? What have you been doing? Are you practicing in your backyard? The moon is in our backyard, right? 238,000 miles away. So Lagrange points are perfect to send somebody out there 1 million miles from mama, and they're there for a year or 2 years. It's got to be serious, not 4 months or 6 months or anything. It's got to be serious. A year or 2 years out, and that starts to give you a taste, educates you on what you're starting to face just going to Mars. Much less anywhere else.
That's an obvious next step if we're really serious about going.
It's hugely obvious.
Yeah.
And as well as background galactic radiation really doesn't want to be commingled with aluminum. It reacts violently to that. So it'll kill all your brain cells, so that by the time you get back, if you don't have enough shield on your systems, and our shields help a lot. And water is the base shield there actually is, the best kind of shield there is. The hydrogen atom is very valuable.
I seem to recall somewhere along the line hearing, maybe from you or one of your colleagues, that using human excrement, which is going to occur, and storing it in the shields made a lot of sense.
Yeah, it's true, because so you triple, quadruple bag it, and so you have all these excrement tiles, on the hull, and that's not one that you need for Earth orbit. It's one you need when you're leaving mama and you're going out and you're trying to decide, well, how can we make use of that product to our benefit? Well, it turns out it does have a benefit. It does help.
But when you're in close Earth orbit, like the International Space Station is now, what is it? The Earth's magnetic field shields from galactic radiation?
Basically, you have no shielding on the surface of the moon or no shielding on the surface of Mars. Mars has 1% the atmosphere of Earth. The moon has none. So if you're out walking around in a spacesuit, you're going to be toast. Your brain cells are going to be gone if you spend too much time doing that. Day after day, week after month, so on, right? The solution for both bodies is how much of an underground facility did you make, or facilities? So did you go into the lava tubes of the moon? Did you find some level lava tubes that you go down, but it's level, and they open up? They're huge. So nobody knows that how large some of these cavities are. They could be, there's been speculations, that how long would it take an airplane to fly from one wall to the next wall? Oh yeah. Yeah. There's been some interesting speculations on that because it rings like a bell, hollow.
My goodness.
So you'd have to excavate those on Mars, but you got to do what you got to do. So it's not just always putting regolith over the top of surface stations. We have a way of handling that doesn't require any mechanical lifters or loaders or anything that go wrong.
Because that was really your specialty, is life support.
It doesn't stop. Just because you're in transit, it continues after you landed. Right. So all that's really important. But that radiation would make it to where astronauts could be coming back to Earth and they can't feed themselves. So the Lagrange points are terribly valuable, and that's what we need to acclimate ourselves to. And again, going back to Space Force, to me, that is our potential equalizer with China, not NASA. It is a political body. It is a shell of what it used to be. It does not have the right stuff at all, like it used to have, 50, 60 years ago. It does not have that at all. It's compromised every time it turns around by politicians, all of the time. So Space Force is what we would have to look to.
I do recall an earlier conversation in which you suggested that any private business that wants to work into outer space these days has to contract with NASA.
Basically, they're the source of the money. The private sector's development of commercialization is not there at all to close the business case without NASA. In fact, we closed the business case pretty well. Our satisfaction, if we had 50% of our overhead covered by NASA, 50%, we could cover the other 50 and still have margin for error and that kind of thing that was satisfactory. So we still had different business programs that worked. And I gave 3, one from OMB and 2 from NASA, tutorials at our plant on those business cases.
Well, the AAWSAP program that was done under the auspices of your aerospace company was, in effect, a military contract that you had to ultimately research the paranormal.
Yeah.
And I gather, considering that Lakatsky, the military project manager you worked with, co-authored a book about it now, and that book went through all sorts of approval processes from the government in order to be released. It
huge.
Suggests that you had a good experience in that instance.
He had a hard time getting that published. Yeah. He had to jump through a lot of hoops to make it happen. There were people in his world that were worried to the point, they were worried and afraid of what we were getting into. And they didn't want to see the program continue
But I assume their hesitancy was about the public relations problem of acknowledging what they were doing.
No.
Okay.
No. Way beyond that.
All right.
It was Pandora's box.
Mm-hmm.
They were worried about things that are partially true to be worried about.
Mm-hmm. Maybe we should hold off on getting into this for the moment because it could be an entire other conversation.
Yeah.
The point I was really trying to make is that you have had working relationships with the military in your business, and in this instance, at least to the degree that it worked, it did work.
We had on board, one of our staff was one of the key pilots, one of the 4 pilots that was in the group that saw the first one to see the Tic Tac. Mm-hmm. While it was underwater, and then as it came out of the water, and so Doug was one of our. I think that was in Doug Kirk.
Well, that should also be another conversation.
Yeah.
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 This has been an interesting conversation. It's not a typical topic for New Thinking Aloud, but I couldn't resist having the discussion with you, given the depth of your experience and the fact that when we talk later on about such topics as UFOs and the afterlife, people will understand that you're bringing to the table a lot of knowledge about a completely separate topic of space exploration. And actually, I think there are some interesting areas where they may converge. So for now, we'll close this discussion, and I'll, of course, remind our viewers that we will continue our conversations, and we'll be getting into other areas that are dear to your heart these days, particularly survival of consciousness after death. So I want to thank you once again for being with me, Robert. And for those of you watching or listening, thank you for being with us. You are the reason that we are here. We've just released issue number 2 of the New Thinking Aloud quarterly magazine. You can download a free copy at the New Thinking Aloud Foundation website, newthinkingaloud.org.